Pacific War, there were aircraft that became legends because they were fast. There were fighters that could climb, turn, and hunt. There were dive bombers that screamed down from the clouds and changed entire battles in a few minutes. There were heavy bombers that crossed oceans and cities with massive loads of destruction. But the TBF Avenger was different. It was not remembered because it was beautiful. It was not remembered because it was fast. It was remembered because of the mission it was built to perform, a mission that demanded crews fly low over the ocean, straight toward enemy warships, while every gun on those ships tried to tear them out of the sky. The Avenger was a torpedo bomber, and in World War II, that was one of the most dangerous jobs in naval aviation. To attack a ship with a torpedo, the aircraft could not stay high and safe. It had to descend, it had to get close to the water, it had to line up with the target. And for the torpedo to work, the pilot had to hold the aircraft steady long enough to release it at the right height, at the right speed, and from the right distance. Too high and the torpedo could fail, too fast and it could enter the water badly, too far and the enemy ship could turn away, too close and the bomber might never escape. That was the brutal logic of torpedo bombing. The weapon was powerful enough to cripple or sink a warship, but to deliver it, the crew had to enter the enemy's killing zone by design, not by accident, not because something had gone wrong, but because that was the only way the attack could work. The TBF Avenger was created because the United States Navy knew its older torpedo bombers were no longer enough. The Douglas TBD Devastator had been a useful aircraft in the 1930s, but by the early years of World War II, it was too slow, too vulnerable, and too limited for the war that was coming. The Pacific was enormous. Carrier battles would be fought over huge distances. Aircraft needed more range, more power, better protection, and the ability to carry heavier weapons. Grumman answered with a large, rugged aircraft built for carrier warfare. It had folding wings so it could fit aboard aircraft carriers. It had a powerful radial engine. It had an internal bomb bay. It could carry a torpedo, bombs, depth charges, or later rockets and radar equipment. And it carried a crew of 3 men. At the front sat the pilot. Behind him was the radio man and bombardier. Above and behind them was the turret gunner, watching the sky for enemy fighters. The Avenger was big for a carrier aircraft. Heavy, strong, not graceful, but tough. And that toughness mattered because the job it was built for was almost never safe. A fighter pilot could maneuver, a dive bomber could attack from above and use speed to escape. But a torpedo bomber had to make the most dangerous kind of approach. Low, straight, visible, exposed. The aircraft had to fly toward the ship, not away from it. And the closer it came, the more accurate the enemy fire became. For the men inside the Avenger, a torpedo run was not just an attack. It was a test of nerve. The ocean rushed beneath the wings. The target grew larger ahead. Anti-aircraft shells burst around the aircraft. Traces cut across the sky and water. The pilot had to resist the instinct to turn away, because a hard turn could ruin the attack. He had to keep flying forward, closer, lower, longer. That was what made the Avenger's mission so terrifying. Its first real combat test came at one of the most important battles of the Pacific War, Midway, June 1942. Only 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese fleet moved toward Midway Atoll, hoping to draw out and destroy the remaining American carriers. Japan's carrier force was powerful, experienced, and confident. Its pilots had already attacked Pearl Harbor and swept across the Pacific. The United States had fewer carriers, fewer experienced pilots, and almost no room for error. At Midway, 6 brand new TBF Avengers flew from the island itself to attack the Japanese fleet. The aircraft were so new that many crews had limited time with them. But there was no time to wait. The battle had begun. Their mission was simple to describe and terrifying to execute. Find the Japanese ships, approach at low level, launch torpedoes, survive if possible. As the Avengers approached the enemy fleet, they were met by Japanese Zero fighters and heavy anti-aircraft fire from the ships below. The Avengers were large aircraft. They could not fight like fighters. They could not easily escape once enemy fighters were on them. and they had to keep pressing toward the target. One by one, the aircraft were shot down or badly damaged. Of the 6 Avengers that launched from Midway, only one returned, and that aircraft came back shattered. The gunner was dead. The radio man was wounded. The aircraft itself was badly damaged. This was the Avengers' combat debut. Not a glorious victory, not a clean beginning, a brutal warning. The Pacific War would not be won by machines alone. It would demand crews willing to fly missions where survival was far from guaranteed. At Midway, other American torpedo squadrons suffered even worse losses in older TBD devastators. Carrier-based torpedo bombers attacked the Japanese fleet at low altitude, often without enough fighter protection. Many were destroyed before they could score hits. Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet became one of the most tragic symbols of the battle. Almost all of its men were lost. At first, their sacrifice seemed to achieve little, but their attack helped pull Japanese fighters down to low altitude. It forced the enemy to react. It disrupted the Japanese defense. And when American dive bombers arrived from above, the Japanese carriers were exposed at exactly the wrong moment. Within minutes, the battle changed. Japanese carriers were burning. Midway became a turning point. But for torpedo bomber crews, the lesson was unforgettable. Their mission could help win battles, but the cost could be almost unbearable. After Midway, the Avenger became one of the most important aircraft in the American carrier fleet. It flew from fleet carriers, escort carriers, and island bases. It attacked ships. It bombed enemy positions. It hunted submarines. It searched vast stretches of ocean. It carried radar. It flew in daylight, at night, and in bad weather. The Avenger became more than just a torpedo bomber. It became a naval workhorse. But the image that defined it remained the same. A heavy aircraft flying low over the Pacific, carrying a torpedo toward an enemy ship that was firing everything it had. Imagine the attack. The Avenger descends toward the ocean. The water is close now, moving fast beneath the aircraft. Ahead, the enemy ship begins to turn. The crew has been seen. The ship's guns open fire. Heavy anti-aircraft shells burst in the sky. Smaller guns throw lines of tracers across the water. Shells hit the ocean and send white columns rising into the air. Inside the cockpit, the pilot watches altitude, speed, and distance. There is no room for panic, no room for hesitation. The aircraft has to be low enough, slow enough, stable enough. Behind him, the radio man listens through the noise and follows the mission. Above and behind, the turret gunner searches the sky for enemy fighters. The target grows larger in the windscreen. The aircraft shakes from the engine and from near misses. Every instinct tells the pilot to dodge, but the torpedo run demands discipline. If he turns too hard, the weapon may miss. If he releases badly, the torpedo may fail. If he waits too long, the Avenger may be hit before it can launch. So he holds the line. The enemy ship is closer now. The guns are brighter. The tracers are thicker. The ocean is just below the wings. Then the moment comes. The torpedo drops. It hits the water. The Avenger pulls away. But the danger is not over. Now the aircraft has to escape while still low, still close, and still inside the enemy's fire. Some Avengers were hit before they released their torpedoes. Some were hit after. Some crashed into the sea. Some returned to their carriers with holes in the wings, damaged engines, wounded crewmen, and barely enough control to land. There was no such thing as a safe torpedo attack. There was only a chance. And the Avenger gave its crews a better chance than the older aircraft it replaced. It was rugged. It could absorb punishment. Its engine was powerful. Its defensive guns gave the crew some protection. It had the range and payload needed for long carrier missions. And as the war continued, American tactics improved. Fighter cover became stronger. Attacks became more coordinated. Dive bombers, fighters, and torpedo bombers began working together more effectively. Enemy ships were forced to defend against threats from multiple directions. If a ship turned to avoid torpedoes, it might expose itself to bombs from above. If it focused on dive bombers, low-flying torpedo aircraft might get through. This combined pressure became one of the deadly strengths of American carrier aviation, and the Avenger was central to that system. A bomb could damage a ship's deck or superstructure. but a torpedo could strike below the waterline. It could flood compartments, cripple engines, break a ship's ability to maneuver, or send it to the bottom. That made the Avenger dangerous. And because it was dangerous, enemy gunners knew they had to stop it before it released. That is why a torpedo run could become a storm of fire. The Avenger fought across the Pacific as American forces moved closer and closer to Japan. It appeared in the Solomons, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, the Marianas, the Philippines, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Each campaign was another step across the ocean. Each island and each carrier strike pushed Japan farther back, and the Avenger was there again and again, sometimes attacking ships, sometimes bombing airfields, sometimes supporting landings, sometimes flying long patrols over empty water. One of its most important roles became anti-submarine warfare. From escort carriers, Avengers searched the sea for enemy submarines. These missions were often quiet and exhausting. Hours of ocean, clouds, empty horizon. The crew watched for a periscope, a wake, or a submarine caught on the surface. Radar helped them find what human eyes could miss. If a submarine was spotted, the Avenger could attack with depth charges or bombs. These patrols were not always dramatic. They did not always create famous stories, but they mattered. Wars are not won only by famous battles. They are won by supply lines, fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, ships that arrive safely, convoys that are not destroyed. By hunting submarines and protecting the fleet, Avengers helped control the ocean. And in the Pacific War, control of the ocean meant survival. By 1944, the Avenger had become a mature weapon. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, American carrier Aviation helped destroy much of Japan's remaining naval air power. At Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle of the war, Avengers again took part in massive carrier strikes against Japanese forces. By then, the aircraft was no longer a desperate new machine thrown into battle. It was part of a powerful naval system. But inside the aircraft, the danger remained deeply personal. The pilot did not see the battle as a map. He saw the target. He saw the water. He saw flashes from enemy guns. He felt the aircraft shake. He heard the crew behind him, and he knew that one hit could end everything. The turret gunner had his own nightmare. He watched the sky behind and above the aircraft, knowing that enemy fighters could appear at any moment. He had to protect a bomber that could not maneuver like a fighter. He had to fire while the aircraft shook, while tracers passed by, while the mission continued toward the target. The radio man and bombardier also shared the danger. He was inside the aircraft, surrounded by engine noise, radio chatter, and the violence of combat. If the aircraft was hit, he might have only seconds to react. If the Avenger went down, all three men had to hope they could escape, survive the crash, and stay alive in the ocean long enough to be rescued. But the Pacific itself was an enemy. A crew could survive the attack and still die at sea. They could ditch far from the fleet. They could be injured. They could disappear into the water and never be found. Every mission carried that risk. One of the most famous Avenger pilots was George H.W. Bush, who later became President of the United States. In 1944, his Avenger was hit by anti-aircraft fire during an attack on Japanese positions at Chichijima. The aircraft was damaged and burning. Bush continued the attack, released his bombs, and flew out to sea. He bailed out and was rescued by an American submarine. His two crewmen did not survive. That mission became famous because of who Bush later became, but it also represents something much larger. Many Avenger crews faced the same reality. A target ahead, fire everywhere, a damaged aircraft, smoke, a desperate attempt to survive over a vast ocean. Some came home, some did not. By the end of the war, thousands of Avengers had been built. They had flown from carriers and bases across oceans. They had attacked ships, submarines, islands, and enemy positions. They had served in almost every major phase of the American carrier war. The Avenger did not win the Pacific War alone. No aircraft did. The war was won by carriers, submarines, marines, soldiers, sailors, codebreakers, mechanics, shipbuilders, pilots, and countless others. But the Avenger played a vital role. It carried heavy weapons over long distances. It helped break enemy naval power. It hunted submarines. It protected supply lines.
It gave American carrier groups a powerful strike aircraft that could do the dangerous work other aircraft could not. And above all, it gave its crews a machine tough enough to take them into one of the most frightening attack profiles of the war. Low over the ocean, straight toward the enemy, no safe angle, no clean escape, only the mission. That is the legacy of the TBF Avenger. Not glamour, not elegance, but courage under terrible conditions. The courage of 3 men inside a heavy aircraft, flying just above the waves, while a warship threw everything it had at them. The Avenger was not the fastest aircraft of World War II. It was not the most beautiful. It was not as famous as the Mustang, the Corsair, or the B-17, but it carried one of the hardest missions in the Pacific War. It had to fly low. It had to fly straight. It had to enter the enemy's fire by design. The TBF Avenger did not simply carry torpedoes. It carried men into a place where survival was uncertain from the beginning. The ocean below, the enemy ahead, the torpedo armed, the guns firing, and no safe way forward. That is why the Avenger deserves to be remembered, the torpedo bomber that flew into hell.